so that I can show you some advanced technique with CSS. So I think the fun is here. So let's start. So yeah, week 2, day 1. Today we're going to talk about advanced selectors first. Okay, so we've seen basic selectors with tags and IDs and class names. So now I want to show you how we can just achieve the same result with writing less classes as possible. Okay, so sometimes you want to leave your selectors a little bit generic, not too much, of course. You need a little bit of specificity. But if you need your user interface to evolve, you need to leave room to be overwritten by something else. Okay, so let's imagine a button will have a default styling to it, but then the different states will change that style. If that selector is too specific, probably that it won't be overwritten when the time comes. Okay, so you won't be able to change given different states of the button. Okay, so we need to leave a little bit of room in order for our CSS to be overwritten when we want to. So the best way is to just leverage those advanced selectors in order to style the basic element as we want, but also leave room for more specific selectors to come and overwrite our CSS. Okay. So we're going to see also advanced CSS techniques, and we're going to use them in a real-world example to present those. Okay, so we'll have a more in-depth look of some widely used properties, and those are very recurring ones. And with something that we are going to see today, you'll be able to achieve pretty much 85% of what you need to do. Okay, just by mastering everything that we're going to talk about today. You'll be pretty comfortable by creating pretty complex layouts and elements, okay? So yeah, we're going to see interactive examples and playgrounds. So we're going to also make our hands dirty while explaining them, so to speak, okay? Because yeah, CSS is like a puzzle. The goal is to bend the box model to your will. And of course, it's not that obvious like in other languages where the problem is when something bad happens. You need a little bit of experience because learning techniques and pattern is your best way to debug a problem. Okay, so it comes with time, of course. I don't expect you to be a master tomorrow, okay? But yeah, you need to know that the problem with CSS is, in fact, that it evolved from a very ancient language, and from there, you know, now we're using CSS3. That it's another layer on top of something built previously. Okay, so we are dealing sometimes with something that cannot be changed. The new browser releases cannot change something that was there, because otherwise we will break every 90% of the internet. Okay, cannot always use something that is modern. We need to leave also the legacy stuff, otherwise we will break all the internet. Okay, so yeah, with that in mind, we know that we deal with something that is old and something that is more new. Okay, but yeah, most of the times experience will save you more than anything else. Okay, so the more practice that you can get, the better you will become. Okay, but it requires time, of course. But for the most part, I'm going to show you how you can create something beautiful today. And yeah, with those pieces, you can stitch those things or maybe other things. Okay, so you'll be able to also replicate that yourself in other scenarios. Okay, so the goal of today's lesson is not for you to learn all these techniques and being able to use them tomorrow, but I want to show you how something can be done. Okay, so you can know what to look for tomorrow. Okay, and yeah, but provide you with a better understanding of the potential of CSS, what can be done, and how to approach UI development. That is the goal for today. Okay, so yeah, feel free to ask me questions throughout the whole lesson. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay. So if you have any, by the way, okay, I see the chat. from the last lesson. Could you please explain the use of z-index? Oh, yeah, of course. But it's perfect because today we're going to talk about z-index in depth. So just hang on in there and we're going to talk about it. Okay, Flavia? Thank you for the question. So what about advanced CSS? So we need to be able to select elements not only by class IDs and tag names. Okay, we need another way. And also this other way will come in handy whenever you dive into JavaScript. Okay, so those selectors can also be used via JavaScript to actually select something which you may not have control of. Okay, maybe that HTML you cannot change, you cannot add a class name or an ID afterwards. Okay, so maybe you're dealing with something coming from outside, but with a selector, you'll be able to see if you have any class or ID in the tree, starting from there, and then navigate inside those tree and then pinpoint the exact element that you want by just using selectors. So yeah, it may sound a little bit strange, but it's easier said. It's easier that if we see them, okay? So they can help you to avoid the creation of unnecessary classes and IDs and to keep the code clean and well maintainable, okay? That is just something that I previously mentioned to you. If you need to overwrite something, it's better if at least the basic selectors were generic, okay? So if the base of your element is written using generic selector, it can be easier for you to maintain it and to build on top of that, okay? But yeah, of course, that is not always true. It depends on your style of coding. So that is just my advice, okay? But of course, if you follow the rules all the time, you can always overwrite something, okay? It depends. But yeah, as a general practice, if you are able to just use advanced selectors, could be better, in my opinion. Okay, so yeah, let me see if I can click on those. Maybe not. Let me just go here. So here you will find the reference for all the selectors that you need. So basic selectors, the universal asterisk here to just select all elements. Maybe you want to overwrite every element inside of another. You just use div and the asterisk, and you'll actually select all the elements inside of that particular div. Or if you don't specify the div previously, next to it, it will just select all the elements in the document. That is normally used to do some overrides at the top of your CSS document. Okay? But also you'll find this used inside of Bootstrap, for example, because some resets are required in order to have a modern UI nowadays, okay? So the tag selector we've seen already just by using the element name. Class selector with a dot, pretty simple, and we saw that already. And also the ID. So maybe an advanced one could be the attribute selector, okay? So you can see we have so many symbols here. And probably, let's see if it gives us some clue here. So yeah, by title, we can select all the A with a title attribute, okay? And then we can probably select also the only A which has this particular href, or we can use this symbol here to select all the A with an href that starts or contains an example word, okay? So by using this one, we are just actually selecting an element that ends with org in this case, or can be a file extension or something like that, okay? And this one is for the containing word. So in any place in these attributes, if there's an occurrence for this word, okay? So yeah, basically it's just like that. So you can reference the documentation for that, and they're not very commonly used. The normal and generic attribute selector is more common, okay? But if you have or need to do something more advanced, just remember that you can you can use those advanced selectors to your benefit. Okay, and also, yeah, here is another well documented here for the selectors. All the advanced selectors you can find here. Okay, so we still need to talk about some of them. But as you can see, this is a very pretty list, in my opinion, with everything that we can achieve with an explanation next to it. Okay, so let's see some of them. So as a generic rule of thumb, you'll see this symbol here, or a plus or a tilde. Okay, so the greater than symbol can be thought as the parent and all its children. The plus is for anything that comes after, but on the same level, and the tilde is used for referencing everything that has something before, and to be able to select all the siblings. Okay, so let's actually go back here and see what I mean by that. So yeah, the tilde, the generic sibling combinator. The combinator selects siblings. Okay, so everything that is on the same level, but that's in this example here, every span that follows a P. Okay, and yeah, we're going to experiment with this a little bit, so you can see what I mean by that. But yeah, there's also this greater than symbol, which is a combinator that selects all no direct children of the first element. So I think really important to remember in a selector is that you're always selecting the last part of the selector. Okay, so in this case, we are doing something with an li, and everything that's coming before is just to make that selector specific. Okay, so always remember that you're dealing with always the last part of the selector, just to not get confused. Okay, so in order to understand what you're doing with that last part, the particular selectors comes at play. Okay, so in this case, you're selecting all the LIs inside of a UL, and you're doing something with it. In this case, you're selecting all the spans on the same level, but after a P tag. Okay, so it's always like that. You always need to think about what comes last in my selector. And then we have this plus symbol. So for the adjacent sibling combinator, in case of just one element, in this case, it was all the spans. In this case, it's just one element after and next to an H2, for example. So this will match all the P elements that directly follow an H2. Okay, so always the last part. So in case we are using the selector here, we are affecting only the P, not the parent. So this part here is just for more accurately select this exact element here. Okay. So yeah, in case of a space, you're probably very familiar already with that. You're looking for anything that's inside of a parent. So this one is a parent, and every span that appears inside of a span, regardless of the nesting, so how many layers, if it's actually adjacent or not, if it's just a child of that div, or if maybe it's more deeper in the tree, this will always select a span inside of a particular div or class or ID. Okay, so if you're using this is the most generic one. Okay, so in this case, we're selecting only children of a particular div and only for the first level, not any inner levels. Okay, in this case, we are selecting everything that comes after a P. In this case, every span that comes after a P. In this case, we're selecting only a P next to, on the same level of an H2 tag. Okay, so yeah, the same thing here. This is direct children of a div, so it will select all the P's inside of a div. Okay, direct children of means inside, and this plus selects all the elements adjacent to an input. Usually, it can be seen by styling a label of an input like that. And this one selects every element that are preceded by an H1. So every P that is preceded by an H1. Let's try to do something with those so we can see it better. Let me just open the window. Let's go here. Okay. Open folder. Let me go and find Ignite. Where is Ignite now? Here. So day 1. Okay, select this folder, index HTML. All right. So yeah, let's create a new document, Strive week 2, day 1. Okay. So what can we do about this? Let me just create an H1 title, and then we can have main paragraphs. For example, I'm going to have more than one. Okay, let's see if we can see anything. Okay, right. So what if I want to style this? Let me see if I can do something like that. Okay. So in the head, as you know, we can have a style. And so if I want to target just the first paragraph and color this red, I'm using the adjacent sibling. Okay, so you can see now that only the first one gets selected. Okay, so yeah, I can have maybe something nested here, and this will not be affected. Okay, so I'm going to create a new one. 5. Let's put it inside, something like that. Okay, so not even the fifth one. But if I want to select all the P's that comes after my H1, I will use the tilde. And what happens here? So as I told you, it will select all the siblings on the same level. But since we have another level here, you can see this is being more nested regarding the others, okay? This one is not going to be touched. So if I really want to also style this one here, I just need to be more generic, okay? So we need to add something. Let me see what happened now. Color red. Oh yeah, because by doing this, we're actually, if you hover over, you can see what VS Code is looking for. So in this case, it was looking for something inside of an H1, but in this case, there's nothing inside. So in order to use a more generic one, we can either just use P in this case, or if we had a particular area in our document, let's use maybe a tag called main. We just need to be more generic, okay? So in this way, we are selecting all the P, even the more nested ones, okay? Just because, yeah, we're being a little bit specific, but not too much. So you want to use a selector when you really want to be specific. So I can maybe say that I want to look for an inner div, okay, and then a P. So in this way, I'm able to just select the nested one, okay? So yeah, in this way, you can see how we can be a little bit more precise, and this is not a very specific selector in terms of naming as an ID or a class, as you can see, but is very, very much powerful. Okay, so we can do also all sorts of stuff. As I said, we can maybe use an input of type text, okay, and then we can have a label afterwards. I am a label. Okay, so if I want to style the label and just that, I can just use input plus label because they're right next to each other. Okay, so color can be purple. Yeah, maybe can be blue because it's not very, very contrasting. Okay, so maybe you can see now that it's blue, but that only works if the element that you want to style comes after the first one. So it's always in a cascading mode. So the first one should be coming before, and the label should come after. So because if you want to style something, it always requires to be last in the selector, as I told you. If I move this around, it won't affect. So actually, it's trying to style the input with the color blue, not the other way around, okay? So yeah, that is why. Let me see about the noise. Just one sec.
I believe that, when you use that kind of, how it's called, the micro, when you move it, probably it's just scratch on your jersey or something like that, because it's a little freeze, it's frying.
Is this better now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so let's see. So after we saw these are the main ones, the ones that you probably are going to use more often, okay? So the direct children is very useful. If you need to just select something next to each other, you just use the plus. If you want something inside of it or coming right next to another element, you use a tilde like that, okay? So the selection by attribute we've seen. Maybe, yeah, we can just do a quick one. Okay, so let me just create an ahref, https strive school, and if this has a target of blank, we'll open this link in another page, in another window. Okay, maybe if I close it, it will like it more, okay? But I need some text here, so strive school, and I should be able to go there, okay? But maybe I want to style this one black and another one that is not going to a target blank. Let's say Google, for example. And this is going to be google.com. So I want to just override the color for the one with an attribute, okay? With the target blank. Okay, so this color should should go black. So as you can see, I was able to be a little bit more specific in targeting the A that I want. So in case of this being generic, of course, it's going to style both of them, okay? So you can play with those attributes if you need to select particularly something like a PDF or any other image, maybe with a PNG. That is done via the attribute selector. Okay, but yeah, let's talk about the pseudo elements and pseudo classes. So a very fun thing to use is the pseudo class. So a pseudo class is something that relates to the state of an element. So every element in the page has at least 4. You can see those here. So those 4 are the most used. Okay. So the active state for the anchor tag, you can see the color purple when it was active or visited. Okay, that is something that is styled via the pseudo class visited. Okay, but the most used one is the hover. Probably you may have seen this already. So everything that will change the state of the particular element, you can trigger via this pseudo class. Okay, so it's like a change in the state of the element. So you can target, for example, the focus if you want to change the appearance of something that was selected via the tab key. Okay, so as you can see, if I select something and then I move with a tab on the page, yeah, it will have an outline like that by default. So if you want to change that outline, you need to use this selector. How can we use it? So let's go back here. So every time I hover over an anchor tag, for example, I want to, let's say, add a background color red. Okay. So actually, right now, every time I hover, I can trigger that change of state, right? And maybe I want to trigger the focus of that. Focus will change my background to, let's say, black. Okay, so background color black, and then I need to invert the text color because otherwise I cannot see it. Color white. Okay, So if I'm able to select something via the tab key, now I triggered that state. Okay, so if I hover over an A tag and I trigger this manually, you can see that some CSS will appear. Can you share the website link for the selector? Sure. Let me do it now for you. Okay, it was around here. Yeah, here. So let me do it one by one. Here's one and the other. Okay, so yeah, you can imagine that probably the most used are those two. So whenever you want to change something upon hovering the element, you can use that is called a pseudo class. Okay, so it's something related to the state of the element itself. Okay, so let's go back here. So we talked about hover and focus, which are the most used. Then something like this comes, and this is a pseudo element. So in every element, something like that can be seen. Okay, you can add an after or a before pseudo element. That means that you can create something that is not actually there, but you can create an element in such a way that it doesn't appear as an actual element, but actually is there. It's easier if I can show you. So let's say that maybe I have, or I can just create it for the anchor. Let me see. Or maybe to the main. I can add a pseudo element to all this main tag here to create a background, for example. So normally you use a pseudo element to add some content before and after. So this is how it was intended originally, okay? So you can prepend quote symbols and append another quote, for example, by using before and after. But let me show you what does it mean if I create a before pseudo element. So since they were intended to have some content in it, if you just want to use the actual graphical entity and not adding any content to it, you still need to specify content as an empty string. Otherwise, it will not work, just because it was originally intended like that. Okay, so if I do like that, and I add a background color of, let's say, red, I give it a little bit of dimension, width 200 pixels, height 100 pixels. Let's see if we can see something already. Okay, we cannot see it, but as you can see, we have something in here. Okay, so let me see if this requires a display block. Yeah, because by default it's of an element with display inline. So as we said the previous time, an inline element cannot have width and height. Okay, so you cannot see something that collapsed upon itself by not having width and height. Okay, so we need to reset the default inline behavior because, as I said, originally it was intended to add something like that, okay, before another element. In this case, it's coming before, so on top. Okay, in order for us to have this not creating any space, but being used as a graphical element, we need to place this absolutely, okay? So first things first, always remember to add an empty content in order to have it, okay? Otherwise it would just, disappear like that, okay? So you can see it's not an actual element, but it's like a state onto this main tag, okay? So you can have it before and after. So in this case, let me just add the display block, okay? So we managed to create a new element like that. Now I want to position it inside of this other element. And what I need to do is to do a position absolute. Okay, so it will not take its own space, but whenever we use position absolute, we should also use the position relative on the parent. Okay, and then maybe if I want this to cover the whole thing, I just need to use the positioning like top 0 right 0, bottom 0, left 0. But since we gave it a dimension, it was constrained to that, okay? But if you just want a background, you can just position it on all the borders to 0. So from the top 0, so it will mean that it will be stuck on the top. Right now, you know, we have the default margins of the page. So that is why we can see that there, but it's positioned on the top of the main. So you can see the area of the content is exactly the same of the element that we stretched in a way, okay? So yeah, that is just to show you how you can create something and position it without the actual element not actually being there, okay? So it's something that is created runtime. You're telling the browser to just display something more than what was actually there. So yeah, normally this is used to just create some graphical elements like borders. Maybe you want to have a particular border on the bottom of a text, or like in this case, having a background, or just maybe if we have, like, let's say 20 pixels, just a border, a graphical element, okay? Okay, right. So any question about this? Okay, so before and after is used usually to insert something before and after an element. Okay, so you can create graphical elements, as we said, and something that is not created via an HTML, but you know, every element can have those two states. Okay, so another thing that is really very used is the first child and last child in order to select something. So yeah, we have some paragraphs here. I can probably comment this out. And so if I want to select just the first child of a div, for example, let me see, probably I need to use P then, yeah. So let me just use this like that, main P. Let me see. Paragraphs first child. Oh yeah, main first child. Well, actually, it's better if we use it in a way that if we had many more elements inside of this div. So let me just create more than one here. Okay, so in this way, we are able to select only the first element of a particular container in this case. We can also select the last one like that, okay? But also we can decide exactly which element we want to select, maybe the third one, okay? So yeah, actually they are all called the same. But as you can see, we can just select the exact number, okay? And we can also use some repetition like that. So every 2 items, just color it red, okay? So yeah, this is a little bit of an advanced thing. I don't expect you to get it right away, but just know that there are some elements, just some selectors that you can use to select the first one, the last of type, the first of type, or you can just select an exact element by using a number here. Okay, so in the case of the fourth, you know, but maybe you want to just reset the margins of the last item because you want to space them out evenly, and you want to just reset something of the first one or the last one. This is a way in which you can do it really fast. Okay, so last child like that. Maybe we can add margin top only to the last one. Okay, so if we increase this, we can have it only on the last element. Okay, so yeah, this is really, really powerful. If you take your time and go over them and experiment with those, you'll be able to do pretty complex stuff by just using those selectors, and you don't even have to create another, because of course we can always add a class name, class like last element and style that, but you can see how this is more convenient and more practical, right? Okay, any question? So as I said, it's just a matter of trying and experiment with them, right? And maybe, yeah, we saw this already. We can already make use of one selector maybe. If you want to create a div with a UL inside and then more allies inside, we are actually using a selector to do that. Okay, we are asking to create something inside of a div and another many list item inside of a UL, right? So yeah, in a way, you're also going to see how you can use those selectors with JavaScript query selector thing. Okay, so it's very important that you become familiar in using all the things that we saw right now. So at least those here, those three here's are really, really important to understand. Okay, an unrelated question. When I copy paste code from one file to another, the new code is all white, no blue tags, etc. Is there something I'm getting wrong? The only alternative I've found is to duplicate the file from its original folder. Okay, when I copy paste code.
Yeah, sorry, that might not be super clear. But I've tried to kind of like copy a whole block of code from one file to another just to kind of not lose it. And every time I just copy it to a new file, it's just completely white. And I'm trying to look for a way to kind of like have it just like
Maybe,
copy file, say, for example.
I'm guessing probably it's because you didn't save the file ready, so VS Code doesn't know about the file type. You should probably just save in case of an HTML or CSS, and then it can recognize it and style it properly. But if it's written correctly, it should work either way, you know.
All right, I'll try it that way. Cool, thanks.
No problem. Okay, any other question?
Stefano.
Yeah.
Hello. I was just wondering, we use the first child as last child just because we don't want to give any ID or class to the HTML. Otherwise, we could do it that way as well, couldn't we? But as you said the last time, it works in this way as well because you want us to keep the HTML clean.
Yeah.
That's why we use the last child and first child instead of the IDs and classes.
Yeah, exactly, because I could always create a class of Goofy, for example, and for the next developer coming here and understanding what Goofy is and what's for, it's harder than just for him to see something that is a standard behavior. Okay. And yeah, our job is also to allow other developers to work with us. Okay, so the more you use something that is really understandable and not a custom class, the better, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, somebody asked what's the difference between 1 colons and 2 colons, like focus and after differ from having 2 of them instead of 1. That is to differentiate the fact that those are pseudo classes and this is a pseudo element. So a pseudo element will create an actual element. This is just to target a state of that particular element. So the state of hovered. So something that has been hovered with a mouse or something that has been selected with a tab keyword. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that is the difference. And because originally they both were written with 1, it will still work with 1, but that doesn't mean that this is correct. Okay, so that have evolved, and from here you can see we have many of those. Pseudo classes and pseudo elements should be written differently, but of course your code, and that is usually the case in HTML and CSS, your code will probably still work, but sometimes it will give you strange behaviors. Okay, but nowadays this is the new standard. Whenever you use some of them, which are pseudo elements selectors, you use 2. Okay. Okay. Yeah. What if you have selected hover for more than one element and want a style applied to only one of those elements? Yeah, that is tricky, of course, because if those elements should behave differently, you should just create a more accurate selector, okay? So I don't advise you to have more than one hover. You should probably, in that case, differentiate them by adding a class to one, maybe, if you cannot deal with a generic selector, okay? So yeah, in case of emergency, let's say, you can always add a class to differentiate one, okay? But yeah, this is a way in which you can always reference something in a document, even if you cannot modify that HTML in order to add a class to it, okay? So this is very, very powerful, and you see that if you dive deep in this development world, okay? Sometimes you just import packages from a server and you don't have access to the HTML, but you still need and want to change the style of it, okay? All right, so yeah, the last thing that we saw was the first child and last child. This is very convenient in order, let's say you have a bunch of cards or boxes in the page and you want to specifically target one and not the other, or the last child was very much used before Flex came around to just reset the margin and space the elements with a margin in between them, but not to the last one. So the whole content will not be out of center, okay? So by resetting the last one, everything will be centered with a space between, but now we have some handy Flex classes, okay? Let me see if we have other, okay. Can we do the CSS in a different page of the HTML in Visual Studio? And how can I link both? Yeah, of course. Always. You can always reference your CSS. So of course, when your CSS grows bigger, you should just use a link tag, style sheet, and then, of course, you need to create a new one, style.css. Now we are on the same level for the file, so we can just use style CSS like that with a dot and a slash. That means that is looking in the same folder. So VS Code will usually help you. If you start writing it, it will suggest the files that are in there. And in this way, yeah, we still have the same thing, okay? Okay, so what's the difference between asterisk and root? Actually, the root is the first element in your page, so that it will be the HTML one. Okay, so the HTML can be referenced as HTML or root. Okay, so if you don't have any other questions, let's move on because we have so much to talk about. Okay, so what I want to show you today is something as a music player card. Okay, so let me just click here. So everything that you'll see from now on was originally created by Lorenzo Zottar. So if you have the chance, just give him a look. It did pretty nice things. It's worth a look. Okay. So everything that you see from now on is made by him. So we want to create something like that. Okay. How cool is this? You can see this in many web applications, probably a less recent version of Spotify. Okay, so you want some interaction for the user. You want an image displayed as a card with rounded borders, a little bit of shadow. I don't know if you can see it, but on hover, the shadow will grow bigger as if the card is coming forward. Okay, so as the source of light is just right on top of the card, straight down to a desk, for example. Okay, so upon hover, we want the title and artist and the album to just go to the right and disappear, and our play button to appear from the left. Okay, so this is something that we want to achieve, and this is our goal. So let's start by creating just the simple card. Okay, so let me just go back here. And yeah, I probably want to erase everything since we don't need it. Let me just create a div with a song card class. You can do it like that, or just writing the whole thing. And an image inside, of course. So I want to add an image with the source, and the image is an auto closing tag, so I'll close it like that because it's not wrapping anything. All right. So let me just grab the source for the image. I can give you that if you want. Okay. I'm going to place it here. Okay. So we have a song card. We have an image. What do you expect to happen now? Let me reset the CSS. Okay. So let's go here. Wow, the image is so big. So normally, if the image does not get any style, it will just be the exact pixel that the file is saved with. Okay, so this is actually the original size for the image. Okay, and our div, of course, is taking the same space, but also is taking all the space on the right. Okay, that is the default behavior of a div with type block, with a display block. Okay, so we want to style a little bit this image. Let's do that. So we know that we probably need, in this case, let's just create a class name, class for song card image. Okay, but also images require, as a good practice, to have an alt key, right? So in this case, we know that it's David Bowie in the picture. Okay, so this is what is going to be displayed if the image for any reason is not being rendered. So maybe the link is broken, the image is not there. You want to display something for the user. And this is also what the Google bots are going to read, because they're still, I don't know if they do it already, but usually the bot will only read the metadata of the image. So if you add an alt, you get more points in a way, okay? Because the bot is being able to understand what is the picture about, okay? But also, if visually impaired people are using screen readers, the screen reader is looking for an alt key, okay? So just remember to always add an alt key, okay? Right. So we want to style this in order to be a little bit more usable. Okay, so first, let's grab song card and then song card image. Okay, or better, let's style the card first. So let's leave it here for a moment. Song card. So our song card is the thing that is wrapping our image, if you can see it. Okay. So let's give this a width of 250 pixels. A height of 350 pixels. Okay, and let's see what happens. Nothing happened. Why? So in order for our image to scale down, we need to also tell to our image to have as a width 100% and as a height 100%. That is because we need to tell the image to actually take the space reserved for our container. So it's taking 100% of our container, which is 350, and it's taking 100% of the width of our container, which is 250. Okay, but usually the ratio of the image, if you just specify that both of those attributes should be a fixed amount of something, in this case it's a percentage, but it's still 350. When you constrain both width and height, you'll probably encounter problems. Okay, so if you want the image to scale proportionally, you just give it one of the two. So the browser will just scale it proportionally in the other direction. But in this case, as you can see, we will leave some space of the song card container at the bottom, because the image cannot stretch in that direction. Therefore, we are going to leave some space. And if you had any other element after, it is going to be placed around here. Okay, so we don't want that. We want exactly the image to be this dimension here. How can we do it? without it stretching, there's a handy property, object fit cover. If I save this, you can see that now the image scaled in a way that it took all the space available, and something, of course, overflowed, but by default that got hidden. Okay, so this is the behavior of the object fit cover property. It will make the inner image scale proportionally, and of course hiding the excess. Okay, but now if we want to have more than one card, those will align better. Okay, because all the cards will be the same height. Okay, this is very important. Otherwise, if you feed different images with different ratios, you'll have cards and text that are bouncy, going up and down, and that is not exactly ideal in case of a consistent UI, right? So let me just place it there. Okay. So another way of using object fit is as contain, but in this case, we will leave some space on top and bottom, okay? That is probably not something that we want to do right now, okay? As you can see, this is the container. Of course, we took all the space available, but we said to the image to not stretch or not get bigger more than the original container size. And of course, since it was a square image, we left some space on top and bottom. Okay, so we are not able to push it to the top with this property here. Okay, so by default, every image has the object fit property to fill. Okay, and if I save this, as you can see, it was the previous behavior. Okay, so in our case, we just need to change this to cover, and we'll get what we want. Okay. So another thing that we want to do is, of course, to give this a little bit of border radius, okay, to have it a little bit more rounded, right? So normally I would just add a border radius to the container, let's say of 10 pixels, okay? I save it and I don't see anything. Why is that? Because, yeah, you cannot see it right now, but the property is there, but the image is not being truncated in a way. We want to use the actual borders of the container, which are rounded, but we cannot see it. Why? Because we need to constrain everything that is an excess that is going out of our container to be cut, okay? And to do that, we use the property overflow hidden, okay? So the edges of the image was actually going outside of our container, which was rounded at the moment. But if we don't use the overflow hidden property, everything that goes out of the container will still be visible. That is the trick, okay? So since we permitted everything to overflow before, even the edges of the image was visible and were overflowing, okay? So yeah, remember to use the overflow hidden in case you want to cut something outside of that particular container. All right, so now we want to center this image, and we can use something that we've seen already, onto the body itself. I want to move this song card to be exactly on the center every time. So on the body, I'm going to use display flex. Nothing happens yet, but justify content center is going to place it on the center horizontally. Then I want to adjust it vertically, okay? And let me see how high is the body right now. So it's actually the same height of my content because that is the default behavior, okay? So if I want to have some space to move my content in the y-axis, I need to increase the height of the body. And I can do that with min height 100 VH, okay? So you cannot see it right now until you hover over. So as you can see, we created a minimum height for the body. So if our content will exceed that amount, it will still stretch. But if you use just height, everything that overflows. Maybe you had a background on the body, you cannot see, you will not see the background color after that particular amount. But with a min height, the body will stretch eventually. Okay, so now since we have more room to move our song card in, we can use the counter axis property of flex, align items, center. Okay, so cool. So just like that, we were able to just position it on the center. Okay, so we need a few more things, not that much. Yeah, we're just going to have a break in 1 minute. Let me just finish those two things. So I want to have the shadow, right? If you remember, we had a little bit of shadow here. So I'm going to use the box shadow property on the element itself. So this is the first element is for the x-axis. So I want to tell him to not have any offset on the x-axis. I want to just move it slightly on the y-axis. So from the top, 1 pixel. Okay. So from the top, I'm moving the shadow down 1 pixel, and then I'm going to specify the radius of how it's going to be blurred in a way. Okay. So last thing, I need a color, and I'm going to use black of 25% opacity. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it, but we have a little bit of shadow here. What we want to do with the shadow now is to increase it upon hovering. Okay, so as we saw, we can always add a hover effect to the song card, for example, with just like that, with colon hover. Okay, then I want to just change that value. Okay, so I can copy this, and I just need to increase this as if it was another state for the element, okay? And I'm going to also increase slightly the opacity of the shadow. So you cannot see the difference right now because we never hovered the image, but if I hover over, you can see it happening, okay? The only thing is that now it's a little bit of a snappy transition. The cool thing that we can add to the main element, so the one without the hover, we can say that whenever you see a change in a particular property, just do an animation for me. So interpolate the values from 1 to 6 and the 5 to 20 in order to have a little bit of transition. Okay, and the property is actually called transition. I need to specify which property I want to have a transition on. In this case, it's box shadow. In case you want to animate any property, you just use all, okay? But in this case, I just want the box shadow, so let's be specific here. I want to animate only if the browser sees a difference in this box shadow property, and I can say how much time this animation should last, okay? Right, so now it will take 200 milliseconds. And as you can see, it's a smoother transition. Okay, so it was actually very simple. 3 properties with a new selector for the hover. Okay, so you can see that this is the main element, but with a different state. Okay, and this state will override just one single property because it's also coming after this one. So as you know, what comes after will have precedence and will be applied. So in case of hovering this card, this property will change from having 1 pixel and 5 to 6 and 20. Okay, and the browser will detect the change, and it knows, because we specify this to him, that if you find any change in the box shadow property of this element, just animate it and use a transition of 200 milliseconds. And that's what happened. Okay, I think we can do a break right now. Yeah, if you have any questions, just shoot them right away.
Well, I use immediately, so then I can go to the break. You put some, we can say, property to the body just because in this case you want to put in the center the card. But in case with that we want to build more than one card, that's probably not needed, right?
probably you want to have something wrapping the cards. So there will be a middle element here, like a div class wrapper, okay? And then you would move this to the wrapper.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Class.
So
okay.
I understand what happened. Thank you.
Yeah, you can see it's the same thing. Okay, but I don't want to complicate this too much. Okay. So
because I believe it was needed to build the card, just to give a position to the card.
Yeah. Right. So
thank you.
Yeah, let's have 15 minutes break, and we can see each other at 50 to 8. Sorry, 10 to 8. 7:50. See you soon.
See you later, guys.
Next one, the transition is provided inside of the hover. Well, let's talk about that later. See you in a bit.
Voila.
All right, so we were here, right? We made out to create this basic card with a simple box shadow that is changing upon transitioning from a non-hover state to a hover state, okay? Somebody asked why not using the transition property in the hover class. So I'll show you why. Okay, so it's there, looks like it's working, but then suddenly disappears whenever I'm not hovering the element anymore. Because, you know, this element exists only when we are actually hovered to the element. So it will apply these properties when we are on the element with the mouse, but as soon as we are off the element, this element just disappears. And then the browser will not have this property to know what to do in order to transition back to the original state. So that is why you will always add this transition property to the root element, okay? The one without any states to it, because this one is always going to be present, okay, this property. Therefore, the browser will know also how to transition back to the original state, okay? That is the answer. I hope I answered. Let's see who made the question. Yeah, Ram, I think. I hope you're here. Yeah, you're here. Perfect. So let's see what we are missing in order to create our card. Okay, so probably the next thing that we need to do is to create the text. Okay, but before we do that, let's go back and see what we did with our properties. So one thing that we used is this border radius, right? So what is border radius? Is the center of the circle or ellipse that rounds the corners. So you need to imagine as having one circle for each corner, okay? And this circle is composed by 2 radiuses, okay? In this case, those radiuses will be 20 pixel and 20 pixel, and this will be the same throughout the 4 corners. In case of having 40 pixel, you can see that this radius increases, right? Therefore, the center of the circle is here, and we're going to have this rounded border because of that, okay? And as we increase that border radius, we go like towards having a box that is almost completely rounded, right? So if we have 2 values separate, we are going to specify a different value for the X radius and the Y radius, okay? And therefore, we're going to create something that is not as rounded, but if that is what you're looking for in creating some kind of shapes like that, you know, 20 pixel on the X and 10 on the Y will create an ellipse like this. 20 pixel on the X and 40 on the Y is going to have a vertical ellipse. And yeah, you can see how this is going, right? An absolute percentage or percentage value you can use as a border radius. So we can probably try that out. So right now we have 20 pixel radius. We can always increase this and let this update itself. As you can see, this looks more like a rounded element. but we can change the radius of the inner circle to have some other thing like that. Okay, that is exactly because of this thing going on here. Okay, right. So the next thing, we saw how overflow worked. Okay, so you need to know that every container, if you give this, or if you give your container some dimensions that are shorter than the content inside, you will encounter something as an overflow. Okay, so in case sometimes happens that you have an image, and since your container actually is finishing here, you're going to see the text right below the image. And that probably is not something that you want or expect, right? You can see the image in the page, therefore you automatically think like this is the area that my div is taking. But actually, if you give that container div a shorter dimension than your content, and you're not specifying an overflow for that, every other element in the page will probably go beneath the image. Okay, so the overflow defines what happens when a child is bigger than its parent. Possible values, visible, hidden, scroll, or auto. Okay, let's go and see what is that about. Okay, so we have a container and we have, let's say, an image. Okay, if you place the image inside just like that, and the container having a dimension, you probably are going to see the image overflowing, but the other elements will be beneath. Okay, if we use overflow hidden, we are constraining everything to be inside of the element visible, and the rest is going to be hidden. Okay, that's what overflow hidden means. We are telling how the page should render regarding the parent sizes. Okay, so if you want to just cut everything that goes outside of your parent, you just use overflow hidden onto the parent. Okay, so I believe I just answered Stephanie's question. Yeah, so overflow hidden behaves like that. But maybe that's not always the case. Maybe you want something like this, right? Sometimes you want to let the user see what's inside, but you want to constrain that area of visibility to this particular square in this case. Okay, so the other property that you can use is overflow scroll, which is not very much used because normally I use auto. That's just me, but the reason is now they look pretty much the same, but in Windows that is not the case for Mac users. You always see those scroll bars even if a scroll isn't needed in case of the overflow scroll. Okay, there is only one reason to use this, and it's just but it's not the case of something that you're going to do in the near future. But whenever a modal element pops up, sometimes the scroll bar disappear, and then you'll see a little bit of a nudge in the page. So the content will move slightly because there's no scroll bar anymore. And only in that time I used overflow scroll to just maintain the scroll bar, even if that was not needed, just to prevent the page to, to move a little bit every time I open a modal. But yeah, let's see if we can change this from here. So I'm going to select, the overflow. You can see it has a class of scroll. So I'm going to find the class of scroll, or better still, I'm going to change the content to be less high. Okay, maybe 100 pixels, and it should not be higher than the container right now. Okay, so you can see we still have the scroll bar here, but not in the overflow auto. Okay, because the element is actually only overflowing on the right. Therefore, if you use auto, it will create scroll bars only when they are needed. Okay, in this case, you can see it's not clickable, doesn't do anything, but it created the scroll bar either way. But that's just for Windows users. Okay, Mac users will not even see anything like this. They just have a little, almost not very seeable scroll item. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's it. So think about being able to constrain everything in a particular parent that you give dimension to. Okay, so you can have patterns, you can have very big images that are overflowing, and if you think about think about that, you can maybe change the position of the underneath image, creating a pan effect, for example. Okay, so over time you can move slightly that image contained inside of your container. Everything that it's overflowing is not visible, therefore you give a nice panning effect, so the image moving slightly in one direction or another. Or maybe you can create a parallax effect in the future. You can do it always with an overflow hidden on the parent. Okay. So yeah, what we saw also was the property object fit onto the image. We needed to tell the image how to behave when it was constrained and squashed in our case. Okay, so if you use width 100% and height 100% on an image contained in a particular container or div that has some dimension that are different from its own aspect ratio, you have the image squashed a little bit or stretched in another case. Okay, so the browser knows this, and you can tell the browser how to behave when this happens, when the image is not respecting its own proportion. Okay, the best thing that you can do is to use object fit cover, because you let the image overflow, but the overflow will be hidden, okay, automatically. And of course, you can auto-generate this yourself, but since we already have the property natively in the browser, why not use it? Okay, so but theoretically, you can, of course, center the image inside of a container, which is overflow hidden. You know, the concept is the same. So given an image, it defines how the image itself should fill the box. Okay, so given an image in the box, I would say, you will tell the image how to behave. So by default, the property of object fit applied by default is fill. So the image stretches to fit the box. And the cover, the image keep its aspect ratio, and that is very important. So it will not look like something's broken. And it's scaled to cover the entire box. With object fit contain, on the other hand, the image keeps its ratio, but it will not overflow. Therefore, you will probably have some border or some empty areas, okay? And if you want another content after this particular box to happen or to stay really close to this element, you can't, because this is the area that the div reserves to itself, okay? So you'll have white space in the best case scenario. Okay, so yeah, the most used one is cover, in my opinion, right? But you, of course, can use fill to reset a behavior if you want. Just know that. Okay, so we also saw how box shadow worked. So yeah, the first property that we use on box shadow is to tell the shadow how to be placed regarding the original element. Okay, so if you want an offset on the x-axis, you can tell that from the left, you want to move the shadow 2 pixels to the right. If you wanted to move it on the left, just used negative values. Okay, so from the x-axis and onward with a positive number, and inward with a negative one. Same thing for the y offset. Okay, you can move it up and down with the same principle. And of course, we're going to have a little bit of blur to the shadow, otherwise it will not be a shadow, but it will be a border. And sometimes box shadow is also used to create borders, okay, and also to animate the color of the borders. So that is something to keep in mind. Okay, the last property is the color. And usually you will use an RGBA because the alpha channel will give you an opacity of, in this case, 25%. So normally you don't want to use a shadow with a full opacity because that doesn't make sense, okay? You can increase the opacity like mimicking a stronger light source after a hover effect, for example. That is something you can do, and we did it on the card, but let's not exaggerate it, okay? So usually the shadow is always some shade of black. That's why you'll see most of the time a 0, 0, 0, 0 property here for the red, green, and blue, because it doesn't really make sense a shadow on a black background to be white, right? You need to just keep in mind that it's mimicking a source of light. Okay, so in any case, the shadow should be a darker shade of a color. Okay, so box shadow adds a shadow to an element. X and Y offset defines where the shadow will be cast. Blur is optional, but defines the shadow blur. Bigger the value, bigger and softer the shadow. Okay, so if you want, yeah, you can also use a very big number for the blur. And of course, the color, the shadow color, usually a low opacity blackish color, as we said. Okay, let's see our playground here. So as you can see, this particular shadow is moved to the right for 3 pixels. Let me zoom a little bit. And then 8 pixel on the y-axis, and you can see it down here. Those are 8 pixels. And then we have 50% opacity. So here instead we have a higher number on the x-axis, less great number on the y. And you can see now by using negative values that it is going to be moved in that direction, okay? Top left. Same thing here if you use negative attributes here. And here you can see it's going to be softer this way, okay? The more you increase the blur, the softer is the shadow. So this is only for pixel blur, so you can see it depends about that. So in case of not having any offset, this is the effect, almost the effect that we used. We used 1 pixel on the Y, but this looks like something being raised from a counter from a desktop, for example, with the light source being directly perpendicular to this element, okay? So you can give this effect of something elevating, okay? If you look closely, you can see that this is the effect that it does. And if this is something coming from the material design concept of Google, okay? So everything that is hovered, in their opinion, should be raised, therefore adding a bigger shadow. It will give that effect. Okay. So the last thing that we used was the transition property. So in order for the transition to work, you need at least two properties, okay? We used the first 2. So the property that you want to animate, or to tell the browser to animate in case it sees anything different or changing on that property, and then the duration of the animation, okay? Can be anything that you like, but of course, let's not make it too long, otherwise you'll make the user wait so much time, and all your interface will look like it's slow or just laggy in a way, okay? So let's not make the user wait unnecessarily, okay? Usually every animation like that are under half a second, for example, okay? So be very aware about that. So you can change in the timing function. So you can change the way that it increases and decreases upon starting and finishing, okay? That is called easing, okay? By default, it's linear, this effect, but you can use ease in, ease out, and ease in and out, okay? You can also add a delay. So one property can start right away and the other one may start sometime after, okay? So you can create like an orchestration of those properties, right? So when the specified property changes value, for example, during a hover, a transition adds an animation between those values. So actually those values are going to be interpolated automatically by the browser for the user. So seconds or milliseconds can be used as a value of duration. Values from and to auto cannot be animated, okay? So it should always start from a particular fixed number, okay? The browser doesn't know what the previous auto property was and where it was, okay? Okay, so timing function and delay are optional. So that's why we could use just the first two. You can see all the list of the animatable properties, and there are quite a few, okay? So you can imagine you can create all sorts of things changing in the page, but I don't advise you to make everything animatable, okay? Because yeah, it's going to be hard to focus on the actual important stuff in the page, okay? Right, so let's add those song info. Do you have any question before we do that? I guess not, okay. So yeah, we need to create a space inside of our song card to store our information, right? And we can see that we have at least 3 lines, right? And what can we say about that? Of course, we need to invert from being, by default, there will be dark, okay? We need to invert the color, and we're going to see how to do that. And we can imagine that this thing will be moved at a later point. So we need to create something that wraps all 3 of them, so it will be more convenient to just move the container that contains this text rather than animating every single line, right? So yeah, by just looking at something, you can always start to think, how can I manage and how can I optimize the HTML to create those, right? So let's do that. So we have a song card. So we want those elements to be placed inside of the card, right? Just like that. And then since we already have the overflow hidden, we know already that when this element will go away, it will be cut, okay? We get that by default if the whole container has an overflow hidden property, okay? So let's create a div with a class of song card info. Oh, let me see if this will help me or not. Song card info. It decided to not work. Okay, no worries. So let's create a div the old way. I probably need to just reboot my VS Code, but I don't want to do that right now. Class. Oh yeah, that's why, because we are inside of the closure of the image. I could have got the clue. Okay, song card info. I know that now it's working because I can see element abbreviation here. If I press enter, I can see my element. Right. So inside of here, I can have three divs, right? So I can use div times 3, and then I can add a class. Or yeah, okay, let's add it like that. Class. This is going to be the song card artist. Okay, and it's David Bowie. We are going to have song card album, which is Aladdin Sane. And last class, song card title. And the title, let me copy it, just be quicker. Okay, right. So I save it, I go here, and I don't see nothing. Why? So when in doubt, always inspect your element. So you need to make sure that actually the thing doesn't exist, but actually the thing exists. It's just that it got pushed away by the fact that our image is 100% high, the same amount of our container. Therefore, it pushed away our element here, okay? Just think about that. We specified height 100% on the image, so there's no space left on the height of our container. That's why we have the song info right here. So just to be sure, if you take out overflow hidden, of course, you can see those. They're just overflowing right now. So how can we move them to be placed in this area here? Any clue? Somebody has any idea? C index? Almost. Not after. Yeah, Tano got it right. Position absolute and z index, right? Of course. But in order to position something absolutely, we also need a constraint, if you remember, to constrain that all the absolute elements inside of a container. We need position relative, okay? Because if I place this position, and you can always try it out in the inspector, there's no harm in trying to do that. Top 0 will be here, that is the problem. So yeah, if you don't specify anything to the containing element, so in this case, our song card, our absolute element is taken out of the flow of the page, and it doesn't know where to position itself other than the top of our viewport, because there's no other element with a position relative that's constraining it, right? And also left 0 will be the most top left part of our viewport. If you want to change this, you always need to apply a position relative to your parent element, okay? This is the most powerful thing in positioning with CSS, okay? So if you think like that, you can always position something relative to something else. And I struggled with this quite a lot at the beginning. So by just understanding this, you'll have so much power and potential to position everything in the place that you want. So now our top and left 0 are in regards of our container. So if I just want to position it at the bottom, it will be bottom left 0, or in our case, we then need to just use a text align center to center everything. Okay. Yeah, but of course, we also need right 0. Okay. Right, so let me just copy this thing. And I probably need also to create, yeah, the classes. So song card info will have text align center position, but I also need to place a position relative here. Okay, cool. So everything is working as intended. And yeah, in this way, you can think like you can always position something at the bottom. This is the most obvious takeaway from that, right? But yeah, it looks simple, but it's really, really powerful. You can always position something relative to a container in whichever place you want. If that being maybe the top right part, you just need to take out the left, this change to the top, and you can see that everything is positioned to the right if it doesn't take all the space, obviously. Okay. So yeah, I have those replicated. So yeah, you can see now that it's been placed there. Okay, so if I refresh, I don't have the duplicated properties because it's only getting those from the file right now. So the next thing that we need to do is to invert the text color, and you can see it a little bit hard to read right now. So as a generic rule of thumb, it's always a good practice if you have text over an image to have a background in order to protect that text and in order for it to be legible and visible, right? You can see it here merging, and yeah, it's like become a hole with the image and it's not really readable, that thing there, right? So we need a way in order to create a background and also to have that background being beneath our text, okay? But we also need to invert the text. So always try to use the inheritance for color and font sizes, right? So we just need one place with color white in order for our inner elements to inherit that color from our parent, okay? So you cannot see the color in here. You can see it's inherited from here, and it says exactly that. If you have too many CSS properties, you can also use the computed tab, in which you only see the properties actually applied to the selected element, okay? And you can see that we have color. The same thing here. We have the color and we can track it down to which element gave us that. Okay, so I clicked in here and I was able to point to the origin of that color. Okay, so now we just need a way to create a background. So actually we already know a way how to do that. Who can maybe imagine which one is that? Any idea? We need to create a background to cover the whole image, or maybe a portion of the image, in order to protect our text and be visible. Any hints, suggestions? How can I create a background that is going to be beneath my text? Opacity. Yeah, we're going to use some kind of opacity, and Tano got it right again. We need to use a pseudo element that is going to be before or after you choose. So we said that we always need a content property. Okay, content of blank string. Okay, we can use background color for now, red. We need to change the default display from inline to block. And we need to position this absolute. After we do that, we can use top 0, right 0, bottom 0, and left 0. Okay, so just like that, we created something that's covering all the area of our container here. Okay, so if, for example, top wasn't 0 but 50 pixels, you can see that these pseudo elements will be created just 50% from the top. Okay, why not add a background for the card info text and span it 100% of card? Oh yeah, of course you can. There's a number of ways you can achieve the same thing. Probably just to be more in a more convenient way, I think is just to have this way, because maybe if you wanted to space, and probably we will, to space at the bottom this song info here, and if you just place the background on the song info and you space that out, you can still peek and see something, yeah, some portion of the image surfacing. Okay, so if let me just take this out. I show you what I mean. If I place a background here, but if I want to space this element from the bottom, I can use padding bottom, or maybe margin bottom will be. Okay, so I don't want that, maybe. So I think it's always best to just use the whole container that will give you the exact measurement, and you will just, you know, give the pseudo element that positioning. No problem. Okay, so yeah, we covered the area. Now we just need to have a gradient in our case in order to create a gradient from some sort of black to a transparent color. Okay, because transparent is always is also a viable color. Okay, so I'm going to use background or background image. It will work the same. Linear gradient, and from bottom to top, this is what it means. I can use black from 0%, so from the beginning, therefore the bottom, because the direction is from the bottom to top. And then I use transparent, that is going to be transparent at 40% of the total amount. And yeah, just like that, we protected our text. We created a safe place for the text to be. Okay, and that's pretty cool. So let me see. Of course, whenever we use something position absolute, it's always a good practice to also add z-index to this, for example, that is the background. I can give this a z-index of 1, and I usually place the z-index as the last thing that I write. And then to the actual infos, I will give a z-index of a higher number, okay? So I will always be sure that the text will be on top, regardless of anything else, okay? So if this becomes 0, you can see that it's beneath and it's not exactly what we wanted, okay? So if you don't specify it, sometimes you get that something is on top when it shouldn't, okay? Because right now they are both position absolute elements, but sometimes you deal with a mixed amount of positioning, okay? So therefore, always apply a z-index and the order of layering that you want. So let me just put also padding 5 pixel and 10 pixel here, okay, to give a little bit of spacing there. Let me see. Okay, maybe a little more, but I want to style those things, the text now, the album, the artist, and the title, okay? I want to have song card artist to have a font size of 1 EM, font weight bold to be a little stronger, and line height 1.2 EM. Okay, so that is for the artist name, right? So song card album will be smaller, font size 0.7 EM, line height 1 EM. Okay. And you can see that shrinking a little bit, right? So we only need the title, song card title, font size is going to be bigger. Okay, last thing, line height, 1.5 EM. Okay, so yeah, you can see that there's a little bit of an issue here if you don't want exactly this kind of behavior. Usually, yeah, there's a way in which we can truncate this text if it ever goes to a new line, okay? Because maybe if we had a longer title, you need to imagine that those cards are going to be automatically generated. So you need to always account for any kind of text being placed there, okay? So if I replicate this many times, you can see that now we have a very higher area for the text, and it's going to be fading away because we cannot take care of the transition of the background, okay? So it's 40%, it's coming from 40%. If this ever goes over that, we don't have any way to protect the text, as you can see here, okay? So we want a consistent way to constrain our text in a particular area, right? And that is something that we're going to do in the next phase. But for now, we made it through and we were able to create the background to protect the text for now, and we just need to truncate it a little bit whenever it goes to a new line, right? So let's go back to the slides. Song info. So we use the overlay and position absolute. So in order to position something relative to its containing parent, you can always do that with position absolute. So if you want to create something like that, of course you can have multiple ways to do the same thing. But if you have multiple elements, probably you want to use position absolute to just take your element out of the flow and create something like this, this space from the border to the actual element here, okay? So given an element in position absolute, if all 4 positions top, bottom, left, and right are specified, the element will be sized accordingly. So all positions set to 0 create an overlay that covers the whole element. If you ever need to do something like we just did, always remember that you can use position absolute, but of course your container needs to be position relative. Otherwise, it will not constrain it, and your top, right, bottom, left to 0 will just be the whole viewport, the whole website. Okay, in most cases, at least. Okay, any position set to a value greater than 0 creates an overlay that partially covers the element. Let's see about that. So, yeah, you can see here that if we change this value to, let's say, 50 pixels, then we don't have an even amount of space all around, but one of the positioning changed to do like that. So in case you want something to cover the entire thing, it's always going to be top, bottom, left, and right to 0, okay? But that is how it was able to create a spacing around. Of course, you can always use, for example, a border, but maybe that's not what you really want to do, because maybe the border will cover something else. Or maybe you want to show in that empty area an image beneath, okay? So you don't want to use any border. And as you can see, the box actually has a position relative in order for the child to be placed inside, okay? That is exactly how this works. So a child inside of a box in a position relative can be placed absolutely and placed to any place inside of this box. So if this has a fixed amount of height, for example, you can see that this changes a little bit how it's going to be displayed. So you need to either choose to have dimensions or just use all for positioning in order to spread the whole thing inside of the container, okay? But of course, if you have a particular set of dimensions that is, relative to that, okay? But you can achieve many things with that. Just keep that in mind. Always remember to have a position relative to the container, okay? So linear gradient, you can see that you can specify the direction first and the exact steps in which the color changes, okay? So this being a little yellowish tint, and this a cyan or something like that, and then this being an orange tint, okay? You can decide at which place these steps takes place, okay? So the first will be 0, of course, and the cyan is going to be placed at 20% from the left because the direction is to right in this case. Yeah, and of course, transparent is a viable color. You can always transition something to transparent. So a CSS function that creates gradients between different color steps is linear gradient. Usually apply to background image or background, not background color. It will not work with background color, remember. Transparent is a valid color step. Multiple step can be defined. And of course, we've seen already the tool to generate gradients, which is really, really convenient. It's going to also give you some examples to start from, and you can tinker with that with this tool. Really cool. Okay. So yeah, same thing in the playground. We can see that by changing this to, let's say, 50, it's going to create a transition that is less effective if two steps are closer to each other. You can always use the same value to just create just a straight line like that, if that is something that you want. Okay, let's move on then. Z-index, this is really, really cool. So it defines the order of the elements on the z-axis, what's in front and what's behind. So by default, the order is just as a cascading thing. The element that comes last will be placed on top usually, but you can always override that behavior. So it applies only to elements with position other than static, and absolute and fixed, relative also. Higher values sets the items, the elements in front of lower values. Okay, so let's try about that. So we have three children. Each one has different colors. We can see that the second one has z-index 1, the third one has z-index 2, and the first one has z-index 3. So the first one, let's see what color is that. White, probably is the red one. So we can change this. I would have probably placed the color to a separate class, so it will be easier, okay? But of course, you can always move things around. So by the same specificity, the last will prevail, as we said, right? So we can have the first one to be placed last, as probably was before. This one could be 2, and this one can become 1 now. As you can see, those will be placed in different positions. If all of them have the same z-index, the order in which they are placed in the HTML will tell the browser how to display them. Okay? Of course, you can also use negative ones. So maybe I can inspect the exact one. And if I want, I can place this behind with -1 or a number less than 1, which the other have. Okay? So if this is in front of now, I can use 0, and then, both of them now have 0. Therefore, this, which is the last one, is on top of the right one. Okay, so by the same number, the order will apply the precedence. Okay, like it usually is with HTML and CSS. If you want something to be beneath, you can use -1. Okay, so you can always change the order of something placed as a position other than static. So if you go with static, the browser will decide, and you cannot operate with z-indexes. Okay, you can use z-index if you use position relative, of course, but not static. Okay, so static also will inhibit this, or inhibit, I don't know how to say it, those properties here. Okay, if you remember, with position relative, you can also use top and left, for example, those positioning. Right. So, part 3. Are you ready? Any questions? I think not. Okay.
It's a lot.
Shall we dive into it then? So, don't let it break. That is what I was telling you before. Just a way to make the text just stay on one line. And if it ever needs to go over, we'll just use these 3 dots that is called ellipsis to truncate the text. Okay, so it's always a good practice if you have a card like that to prevent anything to become bigger or overflowing elsewhere. Right. So let me just go back to VS Code. And yeah, so we need to affect at least one of them, if not all of them, right? So in this case, I can easily create a selector to affect all 3 of them. What if I want to see the infos only if I put the cursor of the image? We're going to do that, but in the other way around. So when we hover the image, the text will disappear, and if you want, you can invert that effect to do the other thing, the opposite thing. So let me just show you. Where are we now? Here. So I want to truncate this whenever it touches the border. Okay, so it knows when the space has finished, and we have a way to target that and to make the text just truncate with the 3 dots. But to do that, we need to select all 3 elements just to make sure in case the artist name is too long or the album name and so on and so forth. So in order to select all of them, I could just use the multiple cursor and with a comma. So you can apply the same rules to multiple elements by using a grouping selector with a comma, okay? So the first rule is white space, no wrap. What that does is by telling the text to never go on a new line, but that if the text was another color, let's say red, and of course we have now the overflow on the card, but that will create a problem like that, the text going over, okay? Usually it's not something that you want, so we need two more properties. Of course, overflow hidden will work on the element itself, but as you can see now, it just gets cut. That is not all the thing that we need. We also need a property called text overflow to be not hidden, but ellipsis. So it knows that whenever text is overflowing, it needs to change it to have 3 dots. Okay. So usually when you have cards, you don't want the user to be able to also select it in this way. Okay, maybe you have an interactive element, you need to drag things around, and you just don't want this effect here. So there's a handy property that we can use that is called user select none. This way I'm not able to select it anymore. Also, yeah, probably I could use it on the card as well. Okay, no more effect like that. Okay, usually on buttons and interactive elements, if you don't want it to appear like highlighted or something like that, you can just use that property there. Cool. Any question, guys? Otherwise, let me just go back to the slides.
Excuse me, can you show the user select again, like how it functions?
User select, yeah. So if I don't use it on card info, for example, I can comment it out. Of course, I place it also here, so it will inherit that property. But now I'm able to highlight the text. Okay, it's not something that you will want on such a beautiful card, let's say. Okay, so maybe just to prevent this from happening, and more so if the card was an interactive element that you can drag around, you probably want to inhibit this effect here. Okay, so that's why we placed the user select none. So this is not the case anymore. Okay.
Yeah, all clear. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so text ellipsis, a technique to gently truncate the text with an ellipsis, 3 dots. And you can see this very much on many websites. It's a perfect way to just keep all the text that being very long, or but if the text wasn't so long, or if we had space here, it will gently just replace those 3 dots. So you can imagine you can always attach that property just in case. Okay, if it was needed, it will be applied. Otherwise, you will see the usual thing. Okay, that is really cool. So you can always know that probably I want this to be here just in case that next time my title is longer. So I don't want this from happening. Okay. So just like having 2 lines like that, you prevent the 2 lines by using white space, no wrap. So there's no wrapping in the text. You want to cut the text, but also to gently place 3 dots in case of the text overflows. Okay. So 3 properties are needed to do that. We just mentioned that. It applies only to an element with 1 inline element inside that overflows on the right, and only on 1 line. okay? So the other property that we saw was the user select. It defines a text that cannot be selected by the user. If set to none, the text cannot be selected. Highly desirable on interactive UI elements, for example, buttons. Okay, so do we need a little break before doing the last part? Or shall we continue? Maybe we can just do 5 minutes to get water if you want. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue. Tell me, guys. All right. Continue. Yeah, strive through it. I like that approach. Perfect. Right, so now we need to create controls. I love your attitude, guys. So this particular button here, we want to create, and we want this button to appear only on hover, and therefore we want also the text to disappear on hover. So there's just two-stage thing, right? But first we need to create this actual button. Okay, so first things first, I need to go back to the HTML, right? And I need one more element here, probably always inside my card, with a div class. Let's call it song card play. I'm going to close it, and it's going to be empty. Okay. So everything that of course, you can always place an icon, but I'm going to show you how you can create a play icon without an actual icon. Okay, sounds nice. So let me go on the CSS. Let me just hide this for a moment while we're working on the button. Display none. Okay, so let me grab this sound card play, and I can place it just here. Let's add a dot, otherwise the selector will not work. Okay, let me just grab the page. Right, so you can see we don't have the text anymore. Let's give this some dimension. So width 50 pixels, height 50 pixels, a background color, in this case, it's going to be this particular color. Okay, and we cannot see it yet, but I believe, yeah, it's there. Same thing that it was for the card info. It got pushed away by our image. So the image is not positioned absolutely, so it's going to push every other non-absolute element. Okay, this is just the flow of the page. So I just need to position this element, position absolute. So left, from the left 10 pixels, let's start from the bottom, 10 pixels, and let's see. Okay, so it's there, but it's beneath our other element here, okay? So we need a z index higher than the other ones. So I think it was 5, so let me just use 10 just to be sure. And we have the area for that button. Okay. So one thing that we can do is to create a border radius in a way that it's just going to be a circle. So from a simple div, we can always create a circle. How can we do that? With border radius 50%. We're going to see why. But for now, that square just became an exact circle, which is exactly what we want. And now we can create the play icon just by using a pseudo element. So I need to reference the same song card play. I'm going to add a before element. Content is always an empty string, otherwise it would not work. Display block, otherwise I cannot give it dimensions. And let's see. So right now I can use something that is some sort of a trick. Let me just show you. So by just using borders, we can create triangles. Okay. So we can create a border which is transparent for the 3 other sides other than the one that we need. Okay. In this way, we can decide the direction. We can use maybe 10 and 14, and we get our simple triangle there just by using borders. So no image is required, no PNG, no fonts for the icon, just this thing here. And of course, we can imagine that the content is collapsed and we are just using the border in our box model, if you think about that. So it's actually just one side of our box, one side of the border, right? So let's continue. Let's go back here. And this one is going to be white. Okay, so what's left to do? We just need to position this little triangle in the middle of our element, just like that. So we know that by having dimensions and having a position absolute, which we don't have yet. So let's see, we need to add it, position absolute. We need top, top 0, right 0, bottom 0, left 0. So by having dimension, by having all 4 attributes to 0, we can use margin auto. And just like that, an element in position absolute with some fixed dimension, in this case it's 0, and with all 4 positioning at 0, can be placed exactly in the center with a margin auto. This is maybe the trickiest part of this lecture, okay? Let me see. If I take those out, you can see that will not work, simply because we are stretching the whole thing on the top. And of course, in order for the triangle to be displayed, we need the actual box to collapse onto itself. Therefore, we're just displaying the border, which has its own dimension. Okay, so if you remember, the box model have padding and content. Our content right now for the before is collapsed, but the border is keeping it alive, let's say. Only the dimension of the border is what we are seeing right now. The content is just collapsed to itself. And that is required in order for the exact centering in the middle. Okay? If you have questions, just shoot them. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. If I can find them. Okay, so we saw how we created a perfect circle is just by the same principle of before. By increasing the radiuses of those circles, at some point, that circle will just be so big that half of the portion of my square will be the exact center. And also the 50% from the top will be the exact center of my square, if you think about that. So if all 4 corners have 50%, the radiuses will just be in the same spot, which is the exact center of the box or the square. Okay, and that is it, actually. So let's see what we have here. Of course, border radius 20 pixel. If I do 40%, we go near of having full circle. Even 45, it's pretty close, but it's not a complete circle. But then with 50% is exactly that. Of course, you can exaggerate with pixels, you get the same effect, but in my opinion, it's less precise. Okay, you cannot go over that, so yeah. But just to make sure, maybe one day your box becomes bigger, right? and that 300% is not true anymore. It's not the exact middle, right? So you can see it's not a circle anymore, but if I use 50%, it's always going to be a circle, no matter what the dimension, okay? That is why it's more advisable to be using 50%. All right, so the triangle hack. We've seen the tool to generate it, though this hack is possible to generate triangle in pure CSS. So it's really less expensive in terms of bytes, okay, in terms of size of the asset, okay. It's generated automatically. The more thing you can generate natively in the browser, the most efficient will be your UI, okay. Also, if you need to animate something, if that is not an image, always the best. So let's see this article here. If you're curious on how this works, imagine a box. The box has a border top. It also has other borders. And notice how the borders meet each other when also the dimension is 0. Then you make them transparent, leaving just one side, and that is your triangle. Let's run it again. So as you can see, those are just normal borders that meet each other by an angle like that. If you take out the content and width and height is 0 now, you're just left with the border size, right? A simple triangle just like that. Cool, right? So in a nutshell, using a box with width and height of 0, it generated exploiting an intrinsic property of CSS borders, just because they meet like that. And if the box just collapses, you're left with a simple and handy triangle. Okay, so the absolute centering is the most cool part in my opinion. So when an absolute position element has a fixed position between two opposite edges and has a fixed size on that dimension, let's say left and right and fixed width. So you need to have at least one axis in which you have both to 0, so left and right 0 and width. You're going to be able to place it at least on that axis in the middle. If you do that for the whole 4 axes, or the 4 positioning and 2 axes, you get the exact middle positioning. So if all positions are fixed, and as well as both width and height, set the margin to auto puts it in the center of its parent. Okay, so that is exactly what we experimented. So in this case, top and bottom, so the y-axis with a height that is an absolute value, and just like that, is going to be placed in the middle in the y-axis. Okay, but width in this case is 100%. Maybe it's something that you want. Okay, but always remember that if you have left and right, for example, and width with a particular dimension, and margin auto will place it centered regarding the x-axis. Okay, so if you want both of them, you just need the four dimension, the 4 positioning elements and the 2 dimension like that. So cool, right? Okay, so yeah, one thing that we need to do still is to create a cursor. And this property sets the shape of the cursor when the element is hovered with the mouse. So right now, let me just grab it. It's just a simple arrow, okay? If I use this cursor property to be a pointer, now it looks like an interactive thing. So it suggests that something will happen if I click in here, okay? So it's always a good thing to add if your element is meant to be interactive. Yeah, I will send you all the link and also the whole presentation. So you have all these very cool link and also the playgrounds to experiment with all the properties. Okay, so let me just add this cursor here. Pointer, right. No problem. Okay, right. Let's go back here. And last part, hanging there. We just need to animate the whole thing. Almost there. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so at the beginning, we need this to be placed a little bit on the left. So we want to hide our play button just a little bit to not be visible at first. Okay, so we need to also reactivate our song info here. So right now they are on top of each other. It's not really pleasant, right? So the thing that we need to do is first to move the play button away by default. Okay, so we're going to animate back this property in order to replace this on this exact spot, but by on the beginning, this needs to have a transform property of translate x minus, let's say, 50 pixel plus the 10 pixel on the left. So 60 pixel to the left in this case. Let me see if I spell this correctly. Transform should be correct, but it doesn't appear to be so. Transform form. Yeah, okay. Thank you, VS Code. I love you. Right. So now it's we pushed it away just enough to not be visible. Okay. We have the overflow hidden on the card, so it's not visible for that reason. So we also need to move the text away only when we are hovering over the card. How can we do that? Let me see if we have the card hover. Yeah, so it makes sense to me to place another hover, song card hover. So we are triggering this when we are hovering the whole card, not just a portion, okay? That is crucial. So we want to listen for a hover on the whole card. This is the whole card, right? That's why I'm using a selector that states that I want that on the song card. I want the hover effect on the parent, but I want to change something of a children. And that's the selector like that. That is what it's doing. So I'm grabbing the parent to just activate this effect on the parent hover, but I want to modify my card info properties. Okay, always remember that the last element in the selector is the one that you're going to affect. But in this case, this will be applied only upon the parent hover. Okay, so let's move this always on the x-axis and away from the left to the right 100 pixels. Okay, so it's not there yet, but if I hover, you can see it nudging away. So not only that, I need to change the opacity of it. Opacity 0. Okay, so right now everything happens all at once. That's not what we want, right? Yeah, so we want to, upon card hover, we need the same thing for the play button to reappear, right? So we need to create another selector, song card play, that is going to change the position to become back the original one, the original position. Translate x is going to be 0, so the original position. Okay, let's see. Yeah, that is what that is doing. But of course, we want a smooth transition on that. But the hard part is over. We just need to apply a transition property to the song card info. That is this one. Let's try with transform, transition, sorry. Transform is the property that is going to be animatable, 0.2 seconds, and opacity, same thing, 0.2 seconds. All right, so now we have the transition on the text, but not on the button. So the last thing that we need to do is just the button one to have as well the transition to it. Same thing, transform is the property that we want to listen for changes. And just like that. Let me see, card play. Do we have the actual transition on that? Transform, yeah, okay, always a typo. Okay, so everything now moves in sync, right? And of course, you can change the duration, so the transform on the text can be longer and the opacity or the other way around, like, you know, coming back slower if that is what you want. But the main thing is that we want this out of the way when the play button appears. Okay? Right, of course. You may think like, okay, I could have moved the left property, but usually when you want to move something with a transition like that, you want to use translate X, Y, or 3D, because that is easier for the browser to animate, okay? You're going to see that animating left, right, top, and bottom is going to be a little bit sketchy or laggy, okay? So always remind yourself to use translate X in order to move things around, okay? Some properties are not animatable. Opacity is, but display none is not. So remember that. You need to be aware of which property you are able to animate and which cannot, okay? Ooh, yeah, I think we are basically at the end. Yeah, there's nothing more to add to it. So let's go back to the slides. Let's see what we use. Of course, opacity is really straightforward. From a full 1 to anything in between is going to give you a shade or an opacity level. And transform, which is the most useful properties to do animation with, is mostly used for translating the position from the X and Y axis, the scale to rotate something. But remember that transformation doesn't change the space reserved by the element in the layout. So that means that the same thing as moving a position relative element, if you remember, it would have leave the space behind, the original space. Only position absolute will take that away. Same thing, transform, you know, I will always take in consideration the original space that the element took, and you can move the element inside in that regards, but always knowing that those borders will always be delineating the area of the element, okay? So other things cannot be placed in there, okay? This is always going to take the original space, but you can modify the inner element in such a way. So translate is just moving in the different axes. You can use both of them. You can use 3D. The scale is just going to increase from the original. If you use more than 1 point, it's going to be bigger. If it's less than 1, it's going to shrink. You can rotate something positively or negatively. Also on the y-axis, the skew is going to deform the object in this way. Of course, you have 2 axes to do that. And you can, of course, combine many properties in the same transform. The way that this is written is just without anything, okay? Not even a comma, as you can see. Just use more properties one next to each other inside of the transform property. Okay, so we made till the end. So in this presentation, you're going to have a link to the whole collection of it. But of course, you can always reference those playgrounds from the slides. And here is everything that we've seen today. You have other resources that you can reference. So the triangle generator, CSS, flat colors that I don't believe we saw, but it's just one of the many resources that you have out there. Okay, so if you need quick colors and you're not very good at picking them, just use some tool like that. Don't be afraid of the tools. So CSS Tricks is like the best place to be for a front-end developer. You have so many tips here, and usually when you search something in Google, you'll get back to these articles of CSS Tricks. Okay, and of course, CodePen is the really nice place to try out something. Even whenever you're going to learn other stuff, you can have a quick way to experiment with things. Okay, just open a pen. You have the HTML panel, the CSS, JavaScript, whenever you're going to learn it. Okay, and the things are going to be rendered at the bottom as you saw. Okay, which site was that? Which one? You have everything on the last slide, so don't worry. Thank you very much for bearing with me so long. It was really nice for being able to try to show you how much stuff you can do with those properties. And bear in mind that we are trying to show you as many things as we can, but of course it takes time. Okay, we know that it's not everything that we can do for you. It's going to be needing so much time in order for that to stick with you and to be able to be fluent. But as I saw, you're doing pretty fine in your homework. So yeah, I really thank you for being with me. I hope to see you soon and have a good evening.